Hello, dear learner and dear viewer, welcome to your favorite program, The Knowledge Quest. I'm your teacher, Mr. Obara Alex, and I'll take you through history and government. So welcome to our lesson today, history and government. Now, in our last lesson, we discussed about Agrarian Revolution. That is the introduction bit of it, and we saw Agrarian Revolution in Britain. Before we get to today's lesson, I want to bring you up to speed, do a short recap of history, of Agrarian Revolution on what we discussed last time. We discussed first and we understood what is the meaning of Agrarian Revolution. And we understood that Agrarian Revolution refers to the rapid changes and improvements in the field of agriculture. That is, how agriculture has changed over time, from the usage of simple tools to the sophisticated kind of tools, and of course from the former land ownership to what we have called the present land ownership. So therefore we looked at the main changes which marked Agrarian Revolution, and we saw the first change was a new system of land ownership, from what was initially was in place to a new system of land ownership. And number two, we saw another main characteristic or a change which marked Agrarian Revolution to be the use of machines and new methods of farming. And we said that Agrarian Revolution basically began in Europe, that is specifically in Britain. Then eventually it spread out to other parts of the world. And we went into detail and saw what were the characteristics of agriculture in Britain before the advent or before the beginning of Agrarian Revolution. And among the characteristics which we saw were the system of land ownership in Britain was the feudal system. The feudal system of land ownership, where we discussed into detail and said that the feudal system of land ownership is whereby land was owned by the feudal kings who could not be able to manage all large pieces of land. They gave out these pieces of land to the lords, or we call them the nobles. And these nobles gave out this land to the peasants, who instead we called the serfs, or the peasants. And then these guys called the serfs or the peasants were to work on those farms or those fields and eventually could get paid or could go home with food. That was the first characteristic of agriculture in Britain. Number two, we realized that the form of agriculture which was used there was open land system, that it was the open field system. Open field system whereby we said land was divided into three portions. So if this is a piece of land, open field system meant that this land was divided into three portions. The first portion was to have corn and wheat, like we saw yesterday or in our last lesson. Then the second piece of land was supposed to have beans, barley, and oats. Beans, barley, and oats. And then the last piece of land was to be left fallow. And we saw the reason why this piece of land was to be left fallow is to regain fertility. It was left idle so that over time it could regain fertility. That was the second characteristic of Agrarian Revolution in Britain before, of agriculture before Agrarian Revolution. Number three, we saw that they used a method of farming called strip farming, whereby land actually was divided into strips. So various strips were divided. Whatever you saw I draw on the board here, these are called strips. So the land was divided into strips. Another characteristic was they used simple implements. Implements made up such as sticks, stones, hoes, and eventually plows, which were introduced. And of course, another one was that they used broadcasting method of planting, whereby the seeds were randomly thrown or spread on the field, and we saw the disadvantage of this method, that some seeds could fall on rocks, some seeds could actually be eaten by rodents and bats. So it wasn't a very good method of planting, but that was another characteristic. They practiced intercropping and also mixed farming. But eventually, we saw that this method of farming changed. And some of the changes which came into place, so the changes I'm bringing up to speed so that we can look at today's lesson. So some of the changes which came about as a result of agrarian revolution in Britain included, number one, fallows were abolished. So the changes. So the first change, we said it was abolition of fallows. That is, that land which was left idle, it was a misuse of the land. So therefore, they decided to abolish leaving land idle and to use that land. So therefore, fallows were abolished. Abolition of fallows. Number two, we realized that they decided to apply new farming methods. For example, introduction of using fertilizers, and of course, there was also use of machines in that case. They decided to use new farming methods. Also, we realized that there was also application of machines or machinery. There was application of machineries, and we saw, for example, a machine like a seed drill, which was introduced by Jethro Tull in the year 1701. So those were some of the results or the changes which were brought about as a result of agrarian revolution. Now today, I want us to quickly to get into the studies of today and see what were the causes of agrarian revolution in Britain. So our study today shall majorly be causes of agrarian revolution in Britain, and then eventually we shall look at the effects of agrarian revolution in Britain. So come with me and let us go into detail and see what were the causes of agrarian revolution in Britain. Causes of agrarian revolution in Britain. So it's a common question that you can be asked to explain the causes, or rather the factors which led to agrarian revolution in Britain. So we shall go into detail and try to dissect and see what were the causes of agrarian revolution in Britain. So the first cause of agrarian revolution in Britain is what we call land consolidation. Number one is land consolidation. So when you talk about land consolidation, this is what we refer to as land enclosure system. Initially, we say the form or the method of farming which was used in Britain was strip farming, whereby land was subdivided into several strips. But they decided, the farmers decided to enclose these pieces of land and make it a single piece of land. That is, so all these pieces of land, all the strips, were done away with, and the pieces of land were consolidated. That is, they were brought together and formed a large piece of land. So this large piece of land was put into use, and as a result, more land was put under production, and more land could be plowed by one farmer. So land consolidation, we say, the farmers now abolish all the strips and bring those strips together to form one piece of land, and therefore you realize that more land is put in use and production in essence increases. Number two, another cause of agrarian revolution in Britain, number two, is what we refer as development of new methods of livestock breeding. Development of new methods of livestock breeding. So when you talk about the new methods of livestock breeding in this case, we realize that more scientific methods were used. And in this case, we have a method we call selective breeding. Selective breeding. So when you talk about selective breeding, this is a more scientific method of breeding animals, whereby animals with desirable characteristics, animals which have desirable characteristics, are interbreeded. So you realize that, for example, if you have your animal which has got a good production in terms of milk, but it's poor in surviving in the environment. So what you'll do, you'll take the animal which survives well in the environment and you'll cross it with the animal which has got good production. And in essence, you'll get or an animal which is able, number one, to survive well in the environment, and number two, produce a lot of milk. So that is selective breeding. So you take animals with very good characteristics and then you cross them. And in essence, you develop animals which have got good characteristics, which can survive in an environment and which can produce more. So that is course number 2, actually, which led to agrarian revolution in Britain. Development of new methods of livestock breeding. Number 3, development of new tools of farming. Development of new tools of farming or for farming. So like we saw earlier, the kind of tools which were used before agrarian revolution in Europe were crude, actually not refined kind of tools. And we saw the kind of tools, for example, we said we had sticks, we had stones being used as tools. But now with the development of new tools, you realize agriculture became more efficient in terms of planting and in terms of harvesting. For example, examples of tools which were brought into place include, number 1, use of drills. And we said the scientist behind the development of this tool is Jethro Tull. We had tools like the Rotterdam plow. We had plows which were put in place. We have tools like threshing machines. Threshing machines. And also we have tools like tractors. So with the coming of such kind of tools, you realize that agriculture became more efficient and there was more development in the field of agriculture. So number 1, we say land consolidation. Number 2, development of new methods of livestock breeding. And then number 3, development of new tools of farming. Example, drills, plows, Rotterdam in that case, threshing machines, and tractors. And these made agriculture to become more efficient, and in return, production increased. Number 4, factor or cause number 4, or which led to development of agrarian revolution in Britain, is development of new methods of maintaining soil fertility. Development of new methods of maintaining soil fertility. Now you and I can remember that we discussed last time and said that one method which was used before agrarian revolution, the method which was solely used in maintaining or in improving soil fertility, was leaving the land fallow. It was leaving the land fallow. But with agrarian revolution, new methods were brought into place. Number 1, we had what we call the 4 crop rotation. The 4 course crop rotation. And like we saw in our last discussion, we realized that there are some crops which were leguminous and some crops were non-leguminous. So what they did, they could actually rotate those crops which were leguminous with those which were non-leguminous, with the idea that the leguminous plants will add nitrogen in the soil, which in essence will increase the fertility of the soil. So therefore they brought about crop rotation. They also allowed what we call or use of chemical fertilizers. Use of chemical fertilizers. So as opposed to leaving the land fallow, they also introduced the use of chemical fertilizers. Actually, these fertilizers were supposed to be added into the soil and in essence to increase soil fertility. So with the development of those methods like crop rotation and use of chemical fertilizers, there was more production of the crops, and in that case there was increase and it brought about agrarian revolution. So that's very important for us to note that this is another factor which led to the development of agrarian revolution in Britain. Let us look at number 5, factor number 5, which led to development of agrarian revolution in Britain. So number 5, we have development of new methods, development of agricultural research, and in universities and institutions and other institutions. So there was development of agricultural research in universities and other institutions, other research institutions. And you realize that the governments in Britain invested a lot of money, that is, to ensure that there was research which was done in the field of agriculture. For example, we talked about the Royal Agricultural Society. This was actually a society which was put in place, and the essence of this society was to publish journals and to put place writings and of course the researches which were done and which were supposed to be known by the people on how to improve farming. Therefore, with the development or putting in place research in universities and institutions, there was more development in agriculture. And this, in essence, helped to spread the results of the research into farmers. So therefore, those research which were put in place could be established in journals, and then eventually they could be spread out to the farmers, which led to the development of agrarian revolution in that essence. Also, number 6, we talk about the impact of industrial revolution. All right, now the next point on the causes of agrarian revolution, number 6, is the impact of industrial revolution. Impact of industrial revolution. So when you talk about the impact of industrial revolution, we are talking about the development of industries, basically in the 18th century and the 17th in Britain or in Europe. So when these industries developed, these industries played a big role in the following ways. Number 1, they manufactured farm inputs. And therefore, when you talk about farm inputs, you can talk about things like fertilizers. Can talk about hybrid seeds. Yeah, so the farm inputs which were manufactured from these industries like the fertilizers and the hybrid seeds were important because they were the inputs which the farmers needed. So because they were produced in large number, they in return motivated the farmers to work more, and that of course led to agrarian revolution. We can also say that these industries provided a market. They provided a market for the farm products. case in instance of, for example, we can talk about factories which could manufacture corn to give us oil. Talk about the factories which needed cotton, for example, to make cloth, and then plus many more industries. So with the development of industries during the Industrial Revolution, we realized that industries developed more, and actually that led to the development of more agriculture, leading to agrarian revolution. So that is point. Also, we can talk about the machines, factories which made machines, the machines which were required in the making of the farms. Talk about the tractors, we talked about the tools like the drills, we talked about the plows which were needed. So therefore, it was important in that case in the led to development of agriculture. And lastly, the last factor which led, which led to industrial agrarian revolution, we have population increase. Population increase. Now you know that when there is population increase, there is a direct demand or increase in demand of food. When there is more population, more food is needed. Therefore, it meant that with the increase in population, farmers had to work harder to produce more food. So with the increase in population, there was high demand, and the food resources, we say, they were low. Therefore, there was need to work harder, to produce more. And in essence, this led to the development of agrarian revolution, or it led to agrarian revolution. So therefore, thus are the causes which we can say in essence which led to agrarian revolution in Britain. Therefore, we shall stop at that point. We go for a short break. We are coming back to continue with the program, and we shall come to look at the effects now of agrarian revolution after seeing the causes. Now, what were the effects of agrarian revolution? Keep tuned. Coming back in a short while. Stay safe. Hello and welcome back to our topic that is agrarian revolution. The subject is history, and we are on discussing the causes of agrarian revolution, which we've done in our past part on causes of agrarian revolution in Europe. Now the next part I want to take you is quite interesting. That is the effects of agrarian revolution. So we want to see after development of agriculture, that's after the improvement and of course the change in the methods of farming in agriculture in Europe or in Britain specifically, what were the effects? Effects in this case we mean the results. What were the results or the effects? And remember, the results or effects can be positive or negative. So we shall look at the results, and we shall be able to understand what were the results of agrarian revolution or effects of agrarian. So we shall leave that part and say the effects of agrarian revolution in Britain. The effects of agrarian revolution in Britain. So with the change of farming methods, the improvements, what were the results? What were the effects of agrarian revolution in Britain? So the first point is there was food security for the population of Britain. Number one, there was food security for the population of Britain. So what you mean here, there were no threats of people going hungry. There were no threats of hunger actually in Britain, because there were more reserves of food. With more food being produced, more reserves were put in place to store this food. So therefore it meant that in case at some point there was flooding or drought, there were more store or reserves of food which could be used by the population in Britain. So therefore there was food security. There was no threat of people going hungry in Britain. So that becomes the first effect, and of course you can see that it's positive, because people now could not go hungry or go without food in Britain. Number two, it led to what we refer to as population growth. there was population growth in Britain. So in essence, what we are referring here, that with more food, of course, the mortality levels, that is the level of people dying out of hunger or out of being hungry, went low. Of course, in that case, it increased life expectancy. That is, people now could live more because there was food and there was security. There was no threat of people going hungry. And in essence, of course, giving birth to more children was not a threat, because if you give birth to more children, you are sure there is food for the children or for the kids you're giving birth to. So therefore, it led to population growth in Britain. And of course, the mortality levels went low and life expectancy increased in Britain. So that becomes the effect number 2, population growth in Britain. Number 3, there was growth of plantation farming. So when you talk about plantation farming, this is whereby individuals or farmers can grow one type of crop on a large piece of land. That is called plantation farming. Initially, the type of farming which was carried out in Britain was subsistence. Subsistence, this is whereby the peasants could grow some crops on a small piece of land for the sake of producing food for their consumption, for the sake of producing food for their families. But now, with land being consolidated, with having large pieces of land, there was growth of plantation farming. So people could plant large pieces of land, one type of crop. Maybe it's tea. For those of us probably who've been lucky enough to go to Kilifi, on your way to Kilifi, you can see a large plantation of sisal. That is plantation farming. Or if you go to Kericho and Kisii, you can see large plantations of tea. That is plantation farming. So this was introduced as a result of consolidating land and not using those strips which initially we saw. So there was growth of plantation farming, which replaced subsistence farming. And of course, another reason why there was plantation farming is as a result of farm mechanization. Farm mechanization. Initially, we saw that we had slaves who were working in farms, but with the introduction of machines, now you realize that slave trade was done away with, and slaves were actually machines were introduced to replace slaves. So therefore, it was easy to work on large plantations using machines as opposed to using human beings who were slow and not efficient as machines could be. So therefore, there was growth of plantation farming to replace subsistence, and of course, as a result of farm mechanization. So plantations were set up in Europe. Number 4, effect number 4, you realize that the poor farmers who could not be able to fence their land lost it. So we actually saw, we had guys that all people we were calling the peasants. Peasants, these were actually poor farmers who were working in some strips of land. So with the introduction of land enclosure system, or with the introduction of land consolidation, whereby now farmers were supposed to consolidate the various strips which were found in faraway places. So in case you are a farmer and you are poor, and you are not able to consolidate all these pieces of land to become a single piece of land, you could sell that land. So they became, they sold their land. And in essence, you realize that this led to what we call landlessness. What is landlessness? Landlessness is whereby now people don't own land. They don't have land which they can call theirs. So the poor peasants were compelled to migrate to urban centers where they were subjected to poor living standards. So there was migration as a result of them not being able to face their land or to consolidate and make their land become one piece. So therefore they became landless, and the only solution was them to move to urban centers to look for employment. And in urban centers, of course, you realize there was influx of people. This actually led even to development of slums in Britain and in Europe, basically. So there were poor living standards of these farmers who were not able to fence their land. And we saw those rich farmers exploited them. They sold their land at cheaper rates, and therefore being exploited. And in essence, that became a negative effect, because now these guys have been rendered landless. So that becomes the fourth effect of agrarian revolution in Britain. And you can tell me, or you can tell that that is not a very positive effect because of landlessness. And you realize that with the moving of these people to urban centers, and with the poor conditions which they were exposed to, social vices or social actually negative things could happen, like prostitution, like stealing from people and all that, as a result of land consolidation. So that was not a very positive effect of agrarian revolution. Let us look at the fifth effect. The fifth effect of agrarian revolution. The fifth one I can talk about is expansion of local and international trade. So from this we can say that with the production of more farm products, for example, we can talk about the crops, we can talk about livestock, you realize that trade developed or trade expanded, both locally, that is, within themselves, the people of Britain could be able to exchange what they have with what they never had. And of course, international, in the essence that they could be able to sell to their neighbors in USA, in Africa, and in essence that led to expansion of international trade. So that in that case you realize that the economy of Britain strengthened. The economy grew, in that now the country became stronger because of the strong economy. That boosted the economy of Britain. So we say that with the production of more products from the farm, you realize that trade expanded. That led to the strengthening or boosting of the economy. Number 6, as a result of agrarian revolution, we have what we call growth of a working class. Growth of working class. Now, if you remember, there was this group of people who became landless. This group of people who actually left their land because they were not able to fence the land. They all opted to move to the urban centers. And what was the reason of them moving to the urban centers? They moved there so that they could be able to get employment. They could be able to get employment. And this employment was to be done in various fields. For example, you can talk about the industries. So they were able to go to these industries, and some of them specialized. They specialized, for example, in machine operation, some in production, some specialized in economics and all that. That led actually to the growth of the working class. People now could work in towns with the essence of running the economy. So you see, that's also another effect of agrarian revolution. Now you realize that the peasants who sought to be paid actually wages, they were employed in those towns and those industries. And eventually there was a working class of people in Britain. So that's the 6th effect of agrarian revolution in Britain. Let us look at number 7. Effect number 7 of agrarian revolution. There was improvement in the transport improvement in the transport and communication network. So it's normal that, you know, after the development of agriculture, there was need for the products which were made from actually the crops which were produced in the farms to be transported to the industries for being manufactured. And of course, the final products from the industries also needed to be transported to the market. And as a result, we had various forms of transport which developed. You can talk about railways and roads. Railways and roads. So more railways and roads were built in Britain as a result of agrarian revolution, and that is positive because actually that is improvement of infrastructure. So therefore, as a result of agrarian revolution, there was improvement in transport. And of course, you remember we talked about a guy called a guy who developed the telegraph. You can remember very well, yeah, as a result of agriculture. So there was communication, and this in essence developed the transport and communication network in Europe. So as early as the 18th century, we had more railways being built, we had roads, and we had